My name is Emily Gardner, and when I was just 6 years old, my parents put me on a train platform in Missouri, handed me a teddy bear, and never looked back. They said it was temporary, just until they got things settled, but the way they pried my fingers off my mother's coat told me the truth. Years later, they'd come clawing back, not for me, but for the land they abandoned me on. Before I take you into the story of betrayal, legacy, and the quiet power of standing your ground, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? I love seeing all the different places these stories reach. Now, here's how everything began, on a windy afternoon that still echoes in my memory. The sky over the station was a tired gray that matched my mother's eyes. I remember that most. Not her voice, not her touch, but the way her eyes darted away from mine like she couldn't stand to look too long. I was 6, clutching the hem of her long coat with my whole body shaking. My shoes were muddy from the walk down to the train depot. The worn floorboards beneath us trembled every time a train passed, but I held tighter to her coat than to the ground. "Emily, honey, don't cry," she whispered, leaning down. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, a neighbor or a teacher, not a mother. Not mine. Behind her, my father was already stepping up onto the train. His voice cut the air like a knife. "Let go, Emily, now." I couldn't, I screamed instead. I don't remember what I screamed exactly, just that it came from a place deeper than breath, raw and endless. My tiny hands balled in the fabric of her coat, pulling and pleading, hoping she'd change her mind if I cried hard enough. Her perfume was the only thing familiar, lavender and cigarettes. "You promised," my grandfather's voice boomed from the other end of the platform. "You said just the summer, don't you dare leave that girl like she's a stray." My grandmother was crying too. "Mara, don't do this, don't leave her like this." My mother, Mara, flinched, but her fingers wrapped around mine, one by one, prying them off her coat like she was peeling away the guilt. I remember the weight of her wedding ring. Cold. "Don't make this harder than it already is," she said, kissing the top of my head like it would undo everything. "You'll be safe here, Emily." Safe, but not loved. My father didn't say goodbye. He never even turned around. The train doors hissed shut like the closing of a casket, and as it pulled away, my reflection in the window grew smaller and smaller until it vanished completely. My scream chased that train down the tracks. The silence that followed it has lasted, in one form or another, ever since. I collapsed onto the bench, hiccuping sobs into my grandmother's lap, while she rocked me and whispered things I didn't understand. My grandfather stood stiffly beside us, hands clenched at his sides like he wanted to run after the train himself and drag them back by their collars. Instead, he took a long breath, crouched beside me, and said something I'll never forget. "Little girl," he murmured, brushing my hair from my face, "you didn't lose your parents today. They lost you. And one day they're gonna realize it." But even then, even through the hurt, a voice inside me whispered, "No, Grandpa, they never wanted me to begin with." That night I didn't eat. I didn't speak. I just sat on the bed they'd prepared for me in the farmhouse, peach blankets, crisp white curtains, and a teddy bear with one button eye. It smelled like cedar and something sweeter, my grandmother's cooking maybe, but all I felt was hollow. I thought if I stayed very still, maybe they'd come back for me. They didn't. The days after the train left were slow, stitched together by routines I didn't yet understand. I woke up not to my parents' voices, but to the soft creak of the farmhouse floorboards and the smell of biscuits warming in the oven. My grandmother, Lorna, wore aprons with tiny embroidered flowers. She sang while she worked, gentle tunes I didn't know, but somehow made the walls feel less empty. When I cried, she didn't hush me. She just sat nearby and let me unravel. My grandfather, Walter, didn't say much, but when he did, it felt like thunder rumbling through the plains, measured, steady, impossible to ignore. He built me a little stool so I could reach the kitchen counter. "You're not a guest," he said. "You live here now." That phrase stuck. "You live here now." It didn't mean I belonged, not yet, but it was a start. They never said anything bad about my parents, not once. But when the subject came up, usually from someone in town asking too many questions, Grandpa's jaw would tighten, and Grandma would wipe her hands on her apron like she wanted to scrub the memory away. I didn't ask why they left. Not at first. I think part of me was scared of the answer, or maybe I already knew. Instead, I followed Lorna from room to room, helping with chores and learning her rhythms. She taught me how to knead bread with gentle, flour-dusted hands and showed me the secret to making apple pie filling that didn't taste like syrup. "We don't buy love with sweetness," she said. "We bake it slow and steady." She had a way of turning everything into something worth learning, even sadness. Walter showed me how to gather eggs without getting pecked and how to listen to the soil before planting anything. "It'll tell you what it needs if you're quiet enough," he said. I started to sleep through the night again. I started laughing, even if only when the chickens did something stupid. I wrote my name in the dust on the barn windows. I drew my parents with stick arms and excess for eyes. Sometimes, I'd find Grandma folding those drawings and tucking them into her apron pocket. She never said a word about them, just saved them like she was collecting evidence of something I didn't yet understand. Their love didn't come with big hugs or loud declarations. It came in quiet things. A cup of milk waiting on the table, socks warmed by the fire, stories told slowly in the evenings. I stopped asking when my parents would come back, because after a while it stopped feeling like waiting and started feeling like healing. But they did come back once that first year, around Christmas. I still remember the way the car tires crunched on the gravel drive, that sound sharper than sleigh bells to my ears. My hands were sticky with molasses from helping Lorna make gingerbread, and when I saw them step out of the car, I dropped the mixing spoon and ran barefoot to the door. My heart pounded like it knew something my head didn't. They brought presents. Brightly wrapped boxes with my name spelled wrong on 2 of them. My mother kissed my cheek like it was a habit she'd forgotten the steps to. My father patted my head, then spent most of the visit talking to Walter in the barn. I sat between them at dinner, but it felt like I was at the wrong table. My parents laughed too loud, complimented food they didn't finish, and checked their watches like they were on a timer. When they left the next morning, they didn't even ask me to come with them. No train this time, just a gust of cold air and the click of a door closing. Grandma sat with me by the fire that night. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stared into the flames. "They think gifts make up for absence," she said quietly. "They don't." She didn't need to say who they were. From that point on, their visits grew fewer, shorter, colder. Sometimes a postcard would arrive, usually from somewhere sunny. Once a birthday card arrived with $10 and a sticky note that read, "Hope school is good. Love, Mom and Dad." No signature, no questions. The house became mine in 1,000 quiet ways, my drawings on the fridge, my boots by the back door. My laughter echoing off barn walls, I still miss them, how could I not? But the ache dulled into something manageable, something survivable. One night, tucked in beneath Grandma's quilt, I asked, "Why did they leave me?" Her knitting needles paused mid-click. She looked at me over her glasses and sighed. "Some people think freedom means letting go of responsibility, but real love stays." I nodded like I understood. Maybe I didn't, but the warmth of her hand on my hair was enough for now. Years passed in that quiet place. I grew up among fireflies, harvest moons, and long summers that smelled like cut hay. The land taught me patience. The animals taught me empathy. And my grandparents, well, they taught me what it meant to be rooted. I stopped writing to my parents. They never wrote back anyway. But sometimes I'd catch Walter staring out toward the road, his jaw tight, his eyes far away. He never said it, but I could feel it. He was waiting for the day they'd show up again. And when they did, he knew it wouldn't be for me. By the time I turned 13, I'd memorized the names of every plant in our garden and knew how to calm a spooked horse better than most grown men in town. School felt like the odd part of my day. The real learning happened when I came home. Walter and Lorna had no degrees on the wall, but they'd built a life from nothing, and every acre of our farm carried proof of their wisdom. I loved that land more than I knew how to say. The rolling fields, the weathered fence posts, the cracked blue rocking chair on the porch where I read books on Saturdays. It felt like the world had left us alone out here, and that was a blessing. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore. The kids at school all had parents who showed up for them. They got picked up in shiny cars, hugged in the hallway, scolded for getting a B+. I waited alone for the bus, watched report cards get handed to moms with coffee breath and dads in scrubs. I watched, and I wondered. My parents still existed. Technically, I just hadn't heard their voices in over a year. When my class had family day, I brought Walter and Lorna. The teacher smiled, called them your sweet grandparents, and gave me a gold star for my family tree poster. But I knew I was the only kid in class whose mom and dad bubbles were empty. I stopped asking questions, but I started listening harder. One afternoon, I came home to find Walter standing on the porch, watching the clouds roll in. The smell of rain hadn't hit yet, but the wind was already bending the corn stalks. I was halfway up the steps when I heard him say it. "They'll come running when we're gone." He didn't know I was behind him. I froze, not even breathing. Lorna came to the door just then, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Don't say that, Walt. I'm just saying the truth," he said. "They don't care now. But one day, when there's something to lose, they'll remember this place. This place, not me." It stung, even though he hadn't meant it that way. I walked softly past them and went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the worn quilt, and thought about what it meant to be something to lose. Not someone. Something. Later that evening, Walter knocked on my door. He didn't come in, just stood in the doorway with that quiet sadness I was starting to recognize. "You heard me earlier," he said. I nodded. "I didn't mean it like it sounded." I didn't answer. After a long pause, he added, "You're not a bargaining chip, Emily. You're everything. That's why we fight so hard to protect this place, because it's the only thing we have to give you that means anything." That was the first time he ever told me he was leaving the land to me. Not directly, but I heard it between the lines. "You should write it down," I said quietly. "So they can't take it." His eyes softened. "I already have." I didn't know it then, but that one sentence would shape every decision I made for the next 10 years. From that day on, I poured myself into school. I started reading books about agriculture, soil chemistry, and land rights. I asked questions, stayed late, and even found a teacher, Mr. Dalton, who let me shadow him at his family's dairy farm over the summer. I wanted to be worthy of the land, of their trust. At night, I'd look out over the moonlit fields and whisper promises to no one. "I'll take care of it. I'll protect it. I won't let them sell it for some vacation money or tear it down for condos." I didn't know if my parents would ever show up again, but if they did, I'd be ready. I was still a child, but I'd already started building armor. It was at 17, during my senior year, that I realized just how much bitterness my grandparents still carried. It wasn't loud, it never was with them. But every time I brought home an award, a scholarship letter, or a glowing report card, Lorna would just nod proudly, then quietly whisper, "They don't deserve to hear this." She meant my parents. She was right. Still, a small part of me ached to prove them wrong, to show them what they'd missed. Maybe if they saw who I'd become, they'd regret it. Maybe they'd apologize. Maybe, but I didn't finish that thought. I'd learned by then not to chase ghosts. The night before my high school graduation, I sat on the porch alone. Lorna was inside baking cinnamon rolls for the reception. Walter was asleep in his recliner, the TV flickering quietly in the background. I was staring at the horizon when the screen door creaked open behind me. "You nervous?" Lorna asked, setting a mug of cocoa beside me. "More like suspended," I said. She chuckled. "Big word, big feeling." We sat in silence for a while, the stars above us blinking like they were trying to spell something. Then she said, "You know, we thought we were too old to raise another child." I turned to look at her. Her face looked softer in the dark. "But you saved us, Emily, not the other way around." I didn't have words for that. I just reached for her hand. The next morning, when I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, I searched the crowd for two faces I knew wouldn't be there. Still, my heart did that stupid, hopeful leap, just in case. But no one came. And that's when I truly let them go. At 19, the day I gave my scholarship speech felt like stepping into the light. It was a small town event, a local agriculture banquet held in the community center with folding chairs, lukewarm coffee, and dusty 4-H banners. But to me, it was everything. I wore a navy blue dress that Lorna helped hem the night before and a pair of heels that made me walk like I had something to prove. The speech was supposed to be 2 minutes. Mine was nearly 5. I didn't mean to go long, but when I stood behind that podium, looking out at the familiar faces of the people who'd watched me grow up, Mrs. Heller from the library, Sheriff Donnelly, the vet who treated our goats, I felt something rise up inside me. "I stand here because 2 people believed in me when others walked away," I said, my voice steady. "This scholarship is an honor, but my real reward is the life my grandparents gave me. A life rooted in soil, sweat, and unconditional love." I heard sniffles. The applause that followed was louder than the crowd's size deserved. A local journalist even took my photo and jotted down a few quotes for the paper. I didn't think much of it. until 2 weeks later when the doorbell rang and I opened it to see them. My parents. They stood side by side on the porch like ghosts dressed in department store smiles. My father wore a crisp shirt he probably hadn't unbuttoned himself. My mother held a white envelope and a fake grin. Behind them, their sleek rental car glittered like a trophy no one asked for. "Emily," my mother said with a breathy little laugh, as if I'd just surprised her at a coffee shop. "You look grown." My throat closed. I hadn't heard her voice in 4 years. My father gave a tight nod. "We read about the scholarship. That was impressive." I didn't answer. The door stayed halfway open. My body blocked it entirely. "We were in the area," she continued, eyes flicking past me toward the hallway. "Thought we might stop by, say hello." They were in St. Louis. We were 4 hours south. In the area was a stretch so big it could cover the entire Midwest. "You've done well for yourself," he said. I folded my arms. "What do you want?" A flicker of discomfort passed between them. "Oh, Emily, don't be like that," my mother said with a forced little chuckle. "We just thought maybe we could reconnect. It's been long enough." "Why now?" I asked. "Why not when I was 10 and asked about you every night? Or when I turned 16 and cried into a pillow because you forgot again?" They went quiet. "I guess we didn't know how to fix it," my mother murmured. My laugh came out hollow. "You can't fix something you never tried to hold on to." They shifted uncomfortably. Then she pulled a piece of paper from her purse. "We wanted to discuss the farm," she said quickly. "Your grandfather isn't getting any younger," and there it was. The real reason, not me. The land. I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Stop, just stop." They looked startled, like I'd swatted them both. "You think one newspaper article makes this your invitation back into my life? Into the life you left behind like a broken toy?" "We didn't mean it like that," my father said, defensive now. "We just thought it might be time to talk about the future of the property." "Why?" I asked, stepping outside and shutting the door firmly behind me. "So you can see what it's worth. Count the livestock, check the soil, flip it for cash you didn't earn." "That's not fair," my mother said. "Isn't it?" I countered, voice sharp. "You weren't there when Grandma had a stroke, or when I learned how to repair a tractor from YouTube videos. But now that the word ownership is in the air, suddenly you care." She looked down. My father scowled. "You don't understand how complicated it was for us back then." "No," I said, stepping back toward the door. "But I understand this. You left, you made that choice, and whatever you think you're owed, you're not. Can we at least sit down?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Just to talk." I paused. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to run. But the part that had grown up under Lorna's gentle steadiness and Walter's iron-spined love, that part said no. "Not today," I said, and I closed the door. They came back a week later, then again a month after that, sometimes with pastries, sometimes with fake apologies and flattery about how mature I'd become. But each time the conversations shifted toward logistics, paperwork, inheritance. "We just want to understand where things stand legally," my father said once. I saw right through them. They didn't want to connect. They wanted to position themselves. And I let them talk occasionally because part of me still held onto that flicker, that irrational childlike hope that maybe one day they'd look at me with something more than calculation. But that hope faded the day I overheard them in the driveway. I was on the porch, just inside the screen door. They didn't know I was listening. "Never manage this alone," my father said. "She's smart, but she's still a girl." "She'll have to sell eventually," my mother replied. "We just need to make sure we're the ones buying." That was the moment. The final splinter that severed the fragile thing between us. I went inside, closed the blinds, and for the first time in my adult life I let myself mourn them, not the parents they were, but the ones I'd once imagined they could be. My grandmother passed away 3 years later. It wasn't sudden. The cancer had crept in quiet and cruel, stripping her of weight, energy, and eventually her laugh. But her spirit, that stayed sharp until the very end. On her final morning, she made me promise 2 things: keep the farm alive and never let pity be my fuel. "Grief's heavy enough," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't let it be the reason you move." I held her hand until it went cold. The funeral was small, just as she wanted. A few neighbors, ladies from her quilting group, and the pastor who had married her and Walter half a century ago. I stood at the front in a black dress that didn't quite fit my body or my mood. My hands shook when I tried to read the eulogy, so I abandoned the paper and just spoke from my heart. "She raised me when she didn't have to," I said, staring at the casket draped in wildflowers from our field. "She taught me that silence can be love, And that strength doesn't always look like shouting. She gave me everything. There wasn't a dry eye by the time I sat down. And then they arrived. I heard the purr of their car before I saw them, polished and too clean for the gravel lot. My mother stepped out in heels that sank instantly into the dirt. My father followed in a designer suit that probably cost more than the tractor I'd just rebuilt. They were late. No apology. Just a strained nod and an air of performance, as if their presence alone made up for their absence. I didn't speak to them at the gravesite. They stood off to the side, talking in low tones to neighbors they hadn't seen in decades, offering hollow condolences. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, though I never saw a single tear fall. At the reception afterward, held in the barn like Grandma would have wanted, they hovered at the edges. They didn't bring a dish, didn't help with the chairs, just made their way from group to group like guests at a business mixer. I watched them sip sweet tea they didn't finish and compliment a life they never truly witnessed. People tried to be polite, but I could see it in the glances. Everyone remembered what they'd done, what they hadn't done. She was so generous, my mother told Mrs. Winslow, a neighbor from down the road. Always had a big heart. We're just devastated. I walked past them without making eye contact. That night I went to bed alone in a house that suddenly felt too quiet. The kettle didn't whistle. The hallway didn't smell like lavender lotion. And the porch swing didn't creak with her gentle weight. I curled into her old quilt and stared at the ceiling until dawn. My parents had already left by the time I came downstairs. No note, just the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the hallway, like a ghost had passed through and thought better of staying. A year and a half went by. I was 24 when my grandfather followed her. One minute, he was mending a gate. The next, he was face down in the dirt, gone before the ambulance could even find the turnoff. I didn't cry right away. Not at the hospital. Not even when I saw him laid out, his hands folded like he was just resting after a long day's work. My grief came later in pieces, when I found his boots still muddy by the door, or when I realized I'd have to sign the death certificate myself. This time, I didn't call my parents. They showed up anyway, an hour before the funeral. My mother wore sunglasses inside the chapel, though it was overcast. My father greeted people like he was hosting the event. Neither one approached me. I stood at the front, my back straight, hands clasped in front of me. I was done making room for people who only showed up when there was something to be claimed. After the service, while I handed out extra programs and hugged our neighbors, they circled. They whispered to each other, eyeing the barn, the tractor, the rows of crops that had survived this season's drought because I stayed up for 4 straight nights adjusting the irrigation. My mother finally approached, standing beside me as I arranged a bouquet on the memorial table. "We were surprised you didn't wait for us before planning everything," she said. I didn't look at her. "He wouldn't have wanted the delay." My father joined us, his voice carefully neutral. "You've really taken charge of things here." "Yes," I said, still not looking up. "You didn't feel the need to consult us." "About what?" I asked, finally turning to face them. "A funeral for a man you haven't seen in how long? 4 years, 5. "That's not fair," she said, bristling. "No," I corrected, "it's just accurate." They stood there in silence for a moment, the kind that exposes every uncomfortable truth you're both too tired to dance around. "I'm handling everything," I said, turning back to the flowers. "That includes you." And with that, I walked away. That was the last civil thing I said to them for a long time. That night, I sat at Walter's desk with a mug of coffee and a folder of documents. Deeds, bills, estate papers. Everything was in order. He had made sure of that. He'd named me executor, sole beneficiary, and legal guardian of the land. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt the first icy ripple of something I hadn't allowed myself to imagine until now. They were going to come for it. Not because they loved it. Not because they respected what it meant. But because they'd finally realized it was worth something. And they would not go quietly. The town attorney's office was lined with dusty books and smelled like old ink and lemon polish. I sat across from Mr. Harlan, a retired Marine-turned-probate lawyer, whose deep voice could slice through courtroom nonsense like a wheat thresher through a dry field. "You sure you want to do this alone?" he asked, adjusting his reading glasses as he slid the will toward me. I nodded. "It's what Grandpa wanted." He studied me for a moment. "That's not what I meant." I didn't respond, just signed where he pointed. The will was clear. Every acre, every shed, every rusted tool in the barn, every stubborn goat and half-blind chicken was mine. The property wasn't split or shared. There were no contingencies. Walter had made sure of that. And still I braced myself. Because when the reading ended and Mr. Harlan cleared his throat to announce the terms, my parents, sitting to my right in matching expressions of tight-lipped expectancy, did not remain composed. My mother gasped loudly, as if shocked that she hadn't inherited land she never visited. My father barked out a stunned laugh like it was a bad joke told at the wrong table. "She gets everything?" he asked, as though I wasn't in the room. Harlan nodded once slowly. "Yes, sir, everything." Walter's instructions were detailed and notarized. "This can't be legal," my mother snapped, eyes narrowing on the paper like she could rewrite it by glaring hard enough. "It is," Harlan said calmly, sliding a copy toward them. "You're welcome to consult your own counsel if you have doubts." She didn't even touch the page, just looked at me like I'd orchestrated a con. "You must have pressured him," she muttered. "An old man, probably sick, easy to confuse." I sat still, hands folded in my lap. "No," Harlan interrupted, leaning forward. "He signed this a year before his death. I was present. His mind was as clear as it's ever been." My father didn't speak, but I saw the pulse tick in his jaw. The silence thickened. Then I stood, smoothing my skirt. "Thank you, Mr. Harlan," I said. "I appreciate everything." "You're welcome, Miss Gardner." My parents stayed seated as I walked to the door. My mother called after me, voice tight and shrill. "Emily, we're not done here." I didn't turn around. I didn't say a word. But that chill creeping up my spine told me what I already knew: this wasn't over. They started slowly. A text here, a call there. At first, the messages were civil. "We should talk about options. Let's find a solution that benefits everyone. You're young, Emily, you could use support." But I knew what those words meant. They wanted a peace. They wanted the power. They wanted to be seen as involved, now that there was something to control. I ignored most of it, answered only with clipped replies when necessary. I stayed focused on the land, fencing repairs, spring tilling, arranging help from a neighbor named Colton who'd worked for Walter on and off for years. But the peace didn't last. One morning I found them in my driveway. Not a call, not a knock, just their car parked like it owned the dirt beneath it. They stood outside, arms crossed, expressions tight. "We need to talk," my father said as I approached the porch. "Then call next time," I said, not moving from the top step. "You've made things unnecessarily difficult," my mother cut in. "We're not here to fight, we're here to reason with you." "Is that what this is?" I asked. "Reasoning." My father stepped forward just one step. "You can't possibly run this place alone, it's too much. You're what, 24, you could travel live, let us handle this burden for you." That word, burden, it stung. I folded my arms. Funny. I don't remember either of you offering to help when Grandpa was alive and feeding livestock with a bad hip. My mother's face tightened. "We didn't know how bad it was." "You never asked." The wind picked up, lifting the edge of the tarp I'd left over the trailer. Somewhere a rooster crowed like punctuation. "We're giving you a chance," she said. "A way out before you ruin everything." "Ruin it?" I stepped down now, the space between us closing like a trap. "You left it behind. You left me behind. This land is mine, by law and by love, and I won't sell 1 inch of it to people who only remembered it existed when a dollar sign showed up." My father exhaled slowly. "Then we'll take legal action." I didn't flinch. I just walked past them, toward the barn, my boots crunching on gravel like gunfire. That night, I locked every door, and for the first time since I was a child, I sat awake until sunrise, listening for footsteps that never came and fearing words that still might. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Not well, anyway. I'd doze off for an hour, maybe 2, but every creak of the house had me jolting upright, my breath caught in my throat. My dreams, when they came, were filled with courtrooms, empty barns, and voices whispering my name like a warning. I changed the locks, bought new floodlights, asked Colton to swing by more often just to have another pair of eyes on the place. But the worst part wasn't what they did, it was what they hadn't done yet. They hadn't sued me. Not officially. No paperwork. No formal letters, just threats hanging in the air like a summer storm that never broke. And that kind of silence, that's what gnaws at your spine the most. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. No caller ID, no name, just a string of digits and a gut-deep warning that made my stomach knot. Still, I answered. Because if I didn't, the not knowing would crawl into bed with me and whisper what-ifs until I couldn't breathe. "Hello," I said. Static, then a rasp. "Is this Emily Gardner?" I froze. "Who's calling?" The man's voice was low and rough, like gravel dragged across wood, not old exactly, but weathered. "Name's not important. What matters is who I was to Walter Gardner." My grip tightened around the phone. "Excuse me. He told me to reach out if things ever got unfriendly after he passed. Said you might need someone in your corner." I didn't answer. My pulse was already hammering. "I don't expect you to trust me," the voice continued. "But your grandfather did. You can look me up. Mitch Carlson, served with him in Korea. I've got credentials. And a file he left behind, sealed and labeled for your eyes only." Every instinct screamed hang up. Instead, I asked, "Why now?" There was a pause. "Because I read the obituary, and I know how long it takes snakes to circle back." He meant them, my parents. "What do you want?" I asked. "To meet," he said simply. "Talk face to face. Show you what Walter left behind." A breath caught in my throat. "I don't know you." "I know," he said, "but I know what's coming for you, and I think you're going to need more than good intentions and a strong will to beat it." Something about the way he said that chilled me. He wasn't threatening me. He was warning me, like someone who'd seen too many good people steamrolled because they believed being right was enough. "I don't trust strangers," I said carefully. "That's smart," he replied. "But if you change your mind, I'll be in the area, and I always keep my promises." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the receiver, my hand trembling. Mitch Carlson. The name didn't ring any bells, but Walter never talked much about his war years. Just kept an old photo in his desk drawer of 4 men in uniforms, squinting into the sun. No names, no context. I'd always assumed they were gone. And now one of them was calling me with secrets, or worse, bait. I didn't know which scared me more. I didn't mention the call to anyone. Not to Colton. Not even to Mr. Harlan. It felt too strange, too out of place. Like a subplot from someone else's story that had wandered into mine. But I did start checking the windows more often. I started looking twice at passing cars. I slept with the porch light on, and I moved the shotgun from the barn to my bedroom closet, just in case. Because whether Mitch Carlson was friend or foe, one thing was becoming clear. I wasn't alone anymore. And that wasn't always a comfort. A few days later, I was repairing a busted irrigation pipe near the front field when the sky turned that particular kind of leaden gray that meant rain was coming fast. I gathered my tools, wiped my hands, and trudged back toward the porch and froze. A black SUV idled at the edge of the property. I dropped my wrench. My heart kicked into overdrive. My hand reached instinctively for my phone, thumb hovering over the emergency call button. And then the driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out slowly, deliberately not young but not frail either. He wore a canvas coat, heavy boots, and a silver badge around his neck that glinted briefly before he tucked it under his shirt. In one hand he held a carved wooden cane. In the other, a thin leather envelope. He walked toward the gate, stopped just short, and called out over the rain starting to fall. "Emily Gardner." I didn't speak, I just stared. "My name's Mitch Carlson," he said. "Your grandfather sent me." The rain was falling hard now, fat drops drumming on the porch roof, slicing through the stillness like a warning. Mitch didn't flinch. He just stood there, the carved cane steady in one hand, the leather envelope tucked under his arm. I didn't invite him in, not at first. "Show me your badge again," I called over the rain. He pulled it out without hesitation, worn but official. Retired but still recognized. Chief Prosecutor's Office, Jackson County. I studied it, not fake. Too old and too used to be something printed overnight. Still, I didn't open the gate. "How do I know you're not another tactic, another pressure point from them?" He nodded, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Fair question, I'd ask the same. All I can tell you is your grandfather trusted me. And I never break a promise, not to men I've bled beside." There was something about the way he said it. Not performative, not sales pitch sincere, just tired, solid, real. I opened the gate. We sat in the kitchen with steaming mugs of black tea between us. I still hadn't fully relaxed. I watched his hands, the way they moved, slow but practiced, not clumsy, not threatening. He placed the envelope on the table like it was made of glass. "This is yours," he said. "Walter told me to hold it until you were alone." Alone. God, that word hit different now. Inside the envelope were several pages of handwritten notes. My grandfather's penmanship, angular and precise. There were copies of property maps, letters from decades ago, and one short paragraph, typed on legal letterhead, with his signature scrawled at the bottom. If anything happens to me or Lorna, my full intention is for Emily Gardner to retain sole control of this land. Any claim made by Mara or Charles Gardner should be considered an attempt to leverage inheritance they have long since abandoned, and I consider any such claim to be illegitimate. It wasn't a legal document, but it was something. Mitch watched my face as I read. "You'll still need a real defense if they come at you hard," he said. "But this gives us leverage." I looked up sharply. "Us?" He gave the smallest smile. "I don't show up for half measures, Emily. Your grandfather asked me to make sure you weren't bulldozed. So here I am, bulldozer repellent." I almost laughed, almost. Instead, I asked, "Why would he trust you with this after all these years?" "Because Walter never forgot loyalty," he said. "I saved his life once, and he saved mine right back. We made a pact. When the world turned against either of us, the other would show up." He sipped his tea. "This is me showing up." Before I could ask more, tires crunched down the gravel drive. My stomach dropped. Mitch rose, moved to the window with slow precision, then sighed. "Well, well." Two police cruisers rolled to a stop just beyond the barn, and behind them, like a crown jewel of smug entitlement, my parents' car. My father stepped out, straightening his coat like a politician. My mother followed, clutching a folder to her chest like she was carrying proof of sainthood. And from the cruisers, two officers emerged, but not the ones I knew. These weren't from our local precinct. These were outsiders, strangers. Mitch's voice dropped. They brought reinforcements. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, heart pounding. "Emily Gardner," one officer called out, approaching. He had a thick neck, a forced grin, and eyes that didn't blink enough. "Yes," I said. "We're here under direction from Mr. and Mrs. Gardner." "They're not my guardians," I snapped. The officer raised a brow. "They've filed a preliminary injunction claiming property fraud. Said there may have been undue influence in the transfer of this estate." That's when Mitch stepped forward. He pulled the badge from under his shirt and flipped it open. "Retired Chief Prosecutor Mitch Carlson. This land is under legal ownership by Emily Gardner, fully ratified by Walter Gardner's will and confirmed by the town attorney Arnold Harlan." The officers blinked. My parents stiffened. Mitch's voice dropped lower. "I'd like to see the documents authorizing your presence on private land." One officer hesitated. The other, younger one, shifted uncomfortably. "You have a warrant?" Mitch asked. They didn't answer. My father stepped in. "This is unnecessary. We just—" "Quiet," Mitch snapped. "I wasn't talking to you." For a moment, no one moved. Then the older officer stammered, "We were doing this as a favor, family friend. Charles said it'd be." Mitch held out his hand. "Your radios, both of you." "What?" the younger one asked, eyes wide. "You entered a property under false pretenses. Impersonating enforcement is a felony. Hand over your radios, now." The silence that followed was suffocating. They obeyed. My father's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious." "I've already called your captain," Mitch said, turning to the officers. "And if he's smart, he'll be on his way here now. You're done." My mother reached for my arm. "Emily, we didn't mean—" I stepped back. "You meant everything," I said. They left without another word, all of them. The SUV vanished down the road like a receding storm cloud, but the thunder they brought, that still echoed inside my ribs. Mitch sat back down, calm as ever. "I told you," he said. "They don't come with honesty, they come with performance and paperwork, but they're amateurs." I stared at him. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we take this to court, we hit first." I nodded slowly. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like something else entirely. Next morning, I found the first dead chicken. It was laid out like a warning right on the front steps. Neck twisted, no blood, just placed. Like whoever did it wanted me to know they'd been close enough to touch what mattered. I buried it in the rain, hands numb from cold and fury. Mitch watched from the porch, silent, a shotgun leaned casually against his knee. "They're escalating," he said. "I can handle scare tactics." He studied me. "This isn't just fear, Emily, it's message sending. They've realized you're not going to fold, so now they're trying to crack your mind." It worked. For a few hours, I kept expecting the next bang on the door, the next trick, the next shadow at the window, but nothing came, just silence. 2 days later, I got the voicemail, blocked number. No caller ID, just a slow, deliberate voice. Male, strained, familiar. "Your grandfather trusted the wrong people," it rasped. "Don't make the same mistake." Click, no name, no threat. Just that single sentence crawling under my skin like frost. Mitch played it back 3 times, jaw tightening. "That's not your dad," he said. Not his cadence, not his kind of threat. Then who? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked outside and circled the perimeter of the property twice that night, cane in one hand, flashlight in the other, his movements tight and purposeful. A man built for war, still fighting ghosts. Meanwhile, I sat in the dark living room, the envelope of Grandpa's notes spread out before me like puzzle pieces from another life. One letter was dated 1987, a correspondence with a man named Harold Strick. Land dispute, a family feud that had quietly gone away, except now it felt like it hadn't. Another letter, scrawled in Walter's hand, if they ever mention Strick again, call Mitch. Do not engage alone. I felt the world shift. There was more to this than inheritance. More than my parents' greed. Something old, something buried. That night the porch light flickered just once, then steadied. But it was enough to send me flying to the window, heart hammering. Nothing, just fog rolling low across the fields. No car, no figure, no motion. Still, I didn't sleep, because the voice on that call hadn't sounded like a man desperate for money. It sounded like someone who wanted something much worse, silence. The fog hung thick over the fields the next afternoon, like the land itself had stopped breathing. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I saw it. A sleek black SUV pulling up the gravel drive. Same model as before, but this time with plates covered in road grit and windows dark as coal. I froze. Mitch wasn't here. He'd gone to town to meet with a lawyer friend and said he'd be gone till late. Of course, that's when they came. I stepped onto the porch with my phone in one hand, the other already brushing against the handle of the shotgun leaning behind the door. I didn't raise it, not yet, but it was close enough that they'd see I wasn't about to be caught flat-footed. The SUV came to a halt. No one moved for a few seconds. Then the driver's door opened slowly, and an old man stepped out, his face partly shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His posture was firm, but his steps were uneven, one leg stiff, the other moving with the rhythm of someone used to pain. He didn't look like law enforcement or like trouble, but I'd learned long ago not to let appearances write the story. Then he spoke. "Emily Gardner." His voice was the same one from the voicemail. My spine stiffened. "Depends who's asking." He gave a slow nod. "Name's Harold Strick. Your grandfather and we go back, long way." I didn't move. "Funny. He never mentioned you fondly." He smiled faintly. "I wouldn't expect he did." I studied him, coat worn at the elbows, a leather satchel slung over one shoulder, and a look in his eyes that I couldn't quite pin. Not anger, not malice, something more dangerous. Patience. "Why are you here?" I asked. He stepped no closer, but I felt the pressure of him anyway, like a storm that didn't need thunder to announce itself. "I'm here to deliver a reminder," he said calmly. "There are debts tied to that land you're standing on. History doesn't care who signs the deed." I narrowed my eyes. "If this is about money," he cut me off with a raised hand. "It's not, it never was." That was somehow worse. He reached into his satchel slowly, deliberately, and pulled out an old, yellowed photograph. He held it up so I could see it but didn't cross the porch line. 4 men in uniform, Korea. One of them unmistakably younger versions of Mitch and Walter. The other 2 unfamiliar. "My brother's in this picture," Harold said. "So is your grandfather. Only 3 of us made it home. And one of those 3 made promises, then broke them." The weight of that sentence pressed against my chest like an invisible hand. He tucked the photo back into his bag. "I don't want your farm," he said, "but someone else might, someone with fewer scruples than me. Think about that next time you hear tires on the gravel." Was that a threat? I asked, stepping forward slightly. "No, ma'am," he said with a slight smile. "It's advice." Then he turned, climbed into the SUV, and drove off without another word. When Mitch got back, I recounted everything, the photograph, the name, the implication. His jaw tightened. "Harold was trouble before trouble knew its name," he said. "He was obsessed with something Walter wouldn't give him, some land deal, some favor never returned. Walter shut the door on him years ago." "Why now?" I asked. "'Cause now you're alone, and he thinks the ghosts won't fight back." Mitch reached for the sealed file Walter had left behind and tapped the corner. "Time to open the rest of this," he said. "Whatever deal they made back then, it's coming due." We barely had time to crack open Walter's file before they returned. This time, my parents didn't come alone. They brought backup, and not just lawyers. 2 uniformed officers stepped out of their car as if rehearsing an entrance. My father gave them a nod, smug as ever. My mother held a thick folder, her lips pressed into a victorious smile like she'd finally cornered the board in a game she thought she invented. "Emily," she called up to the porch. "We need to talk, officially." I didn't move. Mitch stood beside me now, calm and unreadable. One officer approached the steps, his badge freshly polished. "We're here on a formal complaint of property fraud and elder coercion. We need you to come with us for questioning." My throat went dry, but I didn't flinch. Mitch's voice cut in before I could speak. "That's a civil allegation, not criminal. You don't arrest someone over a family dispute." The officer hesitated. "Who are you, sir?" Mitch stepped forward slowly, pulling his badge from beneath his shirt again. "Mitch Carlson, retired chief prosecutor, Jackson County, and I'd like to see the paperwork authorizing this visit." My father's smirk twitched. "He's not on the deed. Has no authority." "I have all the authority I need to call in misconduct," Mitch interrupted. "Now, unless you've got a warrant in your hand, you're standing on private property illegally." The younger officer shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "We were told this was part of an open fraud investigation." "By who?" Mitch snapped. "You know what's illegal? Using your badge to harass someone over inheritance paperwork. You two just became evidence." He pulled out his phone and started recording. "Name and badge number, please." The officers froze. My mother's mouth parted in horror. "Mitch, that's enough. We're just trying to resolve this without court." "Then you shouldn't have brought friends with handcuffs," Mitch said. Silence stretched so tight it hummed. Then, under the pressure, the older officer crumbled. "We didn't file anything official," he mumbled. "They just asked us to look into it, said you might have taken advantage of an elderly man." "He wasn't senile," I snapped, finally finding my voice. "He was sharper than any of you. And he chose me, not because he was manipulated, because I was here. Because they weren't." Mitch lowered his phone. "Leave now, or I'll report this interaction with the state disciplinary board, both of you." They left. So did my parents after one final glance filled with unspoken rage. But as they drove away, tires spitting gravel, I realized something. They were losing. And that made them dangerous. Inside, I collapsed at the kitchen table. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Mitch poured tea without a word. He didn't sit. Instead, he unfolded the last pages from Walter's file, documents I hadn't seen yet. There, at the bottom of a typed letter from 1994, was a name I hadn't expected. Harold Strick. Land agreements, survey maps. Handwritten annotations from Walter, circled and underlined. "Not safe to sell until statute clears. Strick still watching." I looked up. "What is this?" "A deal that never happened," Mitch said. "Back in the 80s, Harold tried to acquire the Southern Pasture. Walter backed out at the last minute, said it didn't feel right, but Strick never let it go." I stared at the letter. "So what does that mean for me?" "It means you inherited not just a farm," Mitch said. "You inherited a Cold War." We didn't have to wait long. The lawsuit came 3 days later, served in a stiff envelope left on my gate by someone too ashamed to ring the bell. I held the papers in my hand, breath shallow as I read the claims. Undue influence, coercion of an elderly man, intentional misrepresentation. My parents were accusing me of fraud. Even with everything I'd expected, the words hit like ice water. Each line painted me as a villain, manipulative, opportunistic, unfit. They'd written my story without asking for a single truth. Mitch read the whole thing without a word, then set the documents down with a calm so complete it scared me more than anger. "They want a settlement," he said. "They don't care about truth. They care about leverage." Then they picked the wrong girl. The trial began 2 months later in a crowded courthouse that smelled of coffee and old carpet. I wore the dress Grandma had sewn for my graduation, a quiet act of defiance. My parents arrived flanked by attorneys in sharp suits who smiled too much and said nothing honest. I sat between Mitch and Mr. Harlan, both calm, both steady. The judge, a woman with gray eyes and no time for theatrics, listened as their lawyer spun a story about a girl too young, too naive, too calculating to be trusted with a farm. They called me manipulative. They said I must have whispered in Walter's ear, twisted his memory, made him forget his true family. I didn't speak that first day. I just sat and listened as strangers dissected my character like it was roadkill. But on the second day, I took the stand, and I told the truth. About the nights I stayed up with Grandpa when his legs ached too much to sleep. About the day I helped Grandma to the bathroom when she couldn't make it on her own. About the birthdays they forgot, the phone calls that never came, the driveway that only ever filled when death was on the table. "I didn't steal anything," I said, my voice shaking. I earned every inch of that land, not with tricks, with time, with love, with loyalty. My parents didn't look at me. They didn't want to see what they'd lost. The court recessed after closing arguments, and for 2 full days we waited. Then came the verdict. The judge ruled in my favor. She didn't just dismiss the case, she scolded my parents for wasting the court's time. Their expressions were unreadable. My mother blinked too quickly. My father clenched his jaw until I thought his teeth would crack. They offered a public apology in exchange for avoiding criminal perjury charges. It was a performance, but it was also defeat. They walked out of the courtroom without looking back, and that was the last time I saw either of them. A year later, the farm looked different. The goats had a new barn. The orchard was coming back to life. We'd opened an eco park for local kids to learn about sustainability, and I'd named the garden after Lorna. Each animal pen had a plaque telling a story, not just of agriculture, but of inheritance and grit and betrayal overcome. Mitch stayed on, said he liked the quiet, said he trusted the land now that I was on it. I walked the fields every evening, watching the sky change colors like a benediction. I was still healing, still scarred, but the land was mine, not just by law, by love, and that made all the difference. The seasons rolled forward like a slow hymn. By the next spring, the farm had shed its old skin. What once felt haunted by silence now buzzed with life. Children laughing in the alpaca pens, neighbors picking tomatoes from the community garden, curious visitors reading about Walter and Lorna from story plaques posted beneath shade trees. People came from town, and even out of state, just to see the girl who held her ground. But I wasn't a girl anymore. I was a woman with sun-scarred hands and a spine made of storms. Every morning, I walked the property before sunrise, not out of fear anymore, out of reverence. I'd pass the orchard, still young but stronger every month, and brush my fingers along the new beehives Mitch had helped build. I whispered good morning to the goats, who always bleated like gossiping old men. And I always paused by the bench under the walnut tree, the one where Grandma used to sit with her quilt and lemon tea. There I'd talk to her, not aloud, just in my head. Told you I'd keep it safe, Lorna. Some mornings, I'd imagine her nodding. Mitch stayed for 2 harvests. Then one day, he told me the wind was changing and he had old roads to walk. He left me the carved cane and a small photo of him and Walter, younger and grinning under a sky I'll never see. "You've got it now," he said. "They won't come back, but even if they do, you won't need a shield. You've become the sword." I hugged him like I imagined Walter once had. He left without looking back. I still get letters. Some from women who have lived through their own family betrayals. Others from young girls asking how I stayed brave. They always ask the same thing: was it worth it? And every time I write back the same answer: yes, because this land isn't just dirt and fences. It's where I was abandoned and where I stood up. It's where love grew like wild clover and where truth was buried but not forgotten. It's mine, and that makes it sacred. If you made it this far, thank you. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you've ever faced something that felt impossible, family battles, legal threats, standing alone, I'd love to hear what helped you through it. Because we don't have to be blood to be family. We just have to show up when it counts.